The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service to others. Mahatma Gandhi. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Nelson Mandela.
We used to all watch the same programs, right? And these weekly movies that would come on Sunday night. There was a special in which Melissa Gilbert of Little House on the Prairie fame played Jean Donovan, the Catholic sister that was doing great work in El Salvador and then was murdered by government sort of terrorists. And I wanted to, do some significant work in the world like that. She was another female hero. She was Catholic. I didn't know many Catholics, but at that time I was like, gosh, being a Catholic sister would be pretty cool. And funny enough, when I joined the Peace Corps, most of my friends were not particularly religious, but they had all seen that particular docudrama, and they all saw Jean Donovan as a hero.
Jennifer Butler sensed as a young person that she might need to leave her community and her known world in order to find herself. She did. And then she did. And in finding herself, she has also found ways to help countless people. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft.
Powerful. Stories.
I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and was coming of age in the 80s. I think I was very much shaped by the South. I grew up being able to run free and roam free. I think of my childhood as running barefoot through the woods, getting off the school bus, dumping my books on the ground, and running off to play with kids until my mom rang a bell, and that meant it's time to come home for dinner. I think I really wanted to be a hero. I think my first role model was Wonder Woman, Linda Carter, the original sort of series in the 70s. And I think it was the first time I saw a powerful, compassionate woman fully in charge, bringing about justice. I used to play Wonder Woman and pretend that I was her. The other really definitive sort of thing about my childhood was that, unbeknownst to me, I was part of a grand social project to integrate public schools. It was the 70s. I was among the first group of kids to go to a truly integrated public school in Atlanta. They had begun busing under Jimmy Carter, and that was a phenomenal experience for me. I was taught entirely by Black women, so I understood them to be the pillars of society that they are. And I, went to school with a really diverse student body. And to me, that was a norm. I didn't know that this was something new. And when you're a kid, a year or 5 years seems like an eon ago. It's another lifetime. And so for me, I would learn about civil rights in school, but I thought the movement, happened, everything had been solved, and everything was A-okay. Until I was about 10 or 11, and I heard relatives using the N-word, and I started to learn that there was racism in my midst, and that was, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance around that growing up, and I think it really shaped my entire life. There's also a tension, I think, growing up in the South, that the role of women, I think, was a little more circumscribed. I remember my best friend's mom, who grew up in Chicago, taking my friend and I aside one day and saying, girls, you really should think about going to college in the North. And so I think I always had this sense, and this might have been part of my Peace Corps experience, that I needed to get outside of my culture to find myself. And yet, running free like I did in that neighborhood, I did have a sense of strength, especially as a little girl, until I hit puberty. And then I felt like my role and the expectations of me got more and more constrained. But I used to be, from an early time, I was a community organizer. I would say I taught all of the kids in the neighborhood how to read before they went to kindergarten. I just liked playing school. And I'm told that their teachers were pissed off about that because they didn't know what to do with these smart kids. My faith was always important to me. Growing up as I did in a white community in the South, I didn't have the language of social justice or community organizing. And so for me, how that manifested in the world was by doing mission work, as a Christian. But for me, what that meant, it wasn't sort of like the conservative mindset of we have to get everybody to be a Christian. It was more, I want to live out what my faith tells me to do, which is bring good news to the poor and freedom to the oppressed. So I wanted to, be a light in the world and go live that out in concrete ways. So when I was in college, I was, a leader in a lot of the campus fellowship groups. And I met a man from Kenya named Morris and a woman from Cameroon named Valerie. And they taught me a lot about the world. And we developed a deep friendship. And when I started talking about what I wanted to do next, I had thought about some of these Christian missionary groups and joining them. And they both, were Christians as well. But they said, Jen, you ought to think about joining the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps volunteers we know live with the people. They really understand the culture well. You could learn a lot from that. And, we both had deep relationships with Peace Corps volunteers. And, it was a mutual sort of relationship. So I took that advice and I joined the Peace Corps.
And now Jennifer finds herself in Belize, a small Central American country with Caribbean coastlines and lush rainforests. It is celebrated for its cultural diversity and natural beauty, but it struggles with poverty, drug trafficking, vulnerability to climate change, and limited economic opportunities.
So I'm standing at my front door. I'm about to head out for the day. It's maybe 7:30 in the morning, but it's already 8 degrees and 80% humidity. So I can smell my deodorant. I can smell sugarcane burning in the distance because most people are sugarcane farmers and it's cane season and they burn the cane before they can cut it. And there's a sweet, sugary smell in the air. I can also smell the pig out back and hear him carrying on. There's always a rooster crowing. And I can hear some of the kids already screaming and yelling and carrying on and laughing and running down the road, getting ready for school themselves. I had a bike, which was like a mountain bike. So everybody watched that bike. They all would love a bike like that. And I would ride to school. And as I rode to school, people out of each house would yell, "Miss Jenny, Miss Jenny." It was like I was chanted into the classroom. It was like a mile. And I would hear that. And I felt very uncomfortable with it, because I just wanted to blend in. But I really stood out with blonde hair and riding a mountain bike. So there's kind of like a sense of celebrity status. But, that kind of standing out is also a little bit dangerous because there were some ne'er-do-wells and sexual harassment was a daily thing that I faced. But the people in the village also protected me. I remember after village festivals, the kids would offer to walk me home, and they would say, there's a sort of Creole that most people spoke, "Miss Jenny, we're going to walk you home so they don't thief you," So I guess so I don't get kidnapped. So I spent a year getting to know people and earning trust. And that meant I did a lot of the grunt work sometimes. For example, there were some El Salvadoran kids who had fled El Salvador and come to live in our village. People weren't sure what to do with them. They didn't speak English. Belize had been a British colony, so the official language was English, although people in my village spoke primarily Spanish and some Yucatec Mayan as well. I ended up tutoring these kids out on the porch of the school where it was even hotter. So we sat out there and I taught them how to read and taught them English. So after about a year of doing that, it became clear that the teachers, they grew to respect me. They liked some of the techniques I was using with the immigrant kids, and they wanted to learn how to teach writing and language arts. So they approached me about that. I reached out to some fellow Peace Corps volunteers, and we put together a teacher training program for all the teachers in the region on how to teach writing and language arts and critical thinking. I started doing what I now know is officially called one-on-ones. In community organizing, they have this technique. I started meeting individually with people in the village and asking what they thought was needed. And one of the things that became clear was they had great teachers, but the teachers had no books, no encyclopedias. I mean, imagine there's one textbook. Most people can't afford it. Most of these kids had never seen a picture book. Books are very expensive. We ended up organizing a library, and I got some funding from the Belizean government for a teacher to be at the library and to manage those books. And fortunately, since the Belize was officially an English-speaking country, I was able to get book donations from the U.S., and they were sent down in big sacks, to make it affordable to ship them. And so we had this one-room little library, and I have these pictures of kids looking through picture books, and you would think they're at Disneyland or something, They'd never seen anything like it. And so people really loved that. And then eventually we ran into a little bit of a situation that taught me a lot. Because there was this new resource introduced into the village, the village chairman wanted to take control of it. And it turned out he was fairly corrupt, but no one had ever bothered to oust him. He'd been a village chairman for 10 years, so he'd more than served. Yet he locked the library, put his own padlock on there, and said, "Now this is mine." And so we had to figure out what to do about that. I spoke to him about it. He sent some of his cronies over to kind of subtly threaten me. So I let my boss know. And I talked to a mentor of mine in the village named Tacho. He had been a Belizean senator. He'd traveled the world and done a lot of interesting development work. And now he was, home in the village. And I went to Tacho and I said, here's what's going on. What do I do about this? And he basically said, "Miss Jenny, you don't worry. We're going to handle this." They called me Miss Jenny. I've never let anybody call me Jenny. I'm a Jen, but I let them call me Miss Jenny. So he talked to all the groups in the village, the women's group, the youth group, and the chairman called some sort of summit, to vote the library under his control. And generally what happened with these community meetings was only about 10 people showed up, mainly his cronies, and he thought he would, get charge of the library. He even called in an outside official from the town of Korzal, and I think her job was, to make sure things went smoothly for him. But she turned out to be an independent operator, and that meeting, it wasn't just 10 people that showed up. They had organized the entire village. They went and did a door-knocking campaign and got the entire village to show up. So it was packed, and there were people leaning out the windows. It must have been a couple hundred people. They told me, "Look, Miss Jenny, you don't say a word. You just sit right here in the middle of the auditorium." So I sat between some people on a bench and watched the women's group leader stand up, take the village chairman to task. One by one, they all stood up, pointing their fingers and just, yelling at him and saying, "You haven't done this and you've done this." And eventually the Belize official shut the meeting down and said, "Hey, we're going to take some of y'all in the back and we're going to negotiate a solution." So she was able to wrest control out of his hands back to the people. And that next year, the people voted him out and got a new village chairman. So after all of that, I went to my Peace Corps director, Dee Dee Runkle, who was just amazing. And I told her that story, and I was like, "I want to do this for the rest of my life. What is it? How do I pursue this? Is this like a career path or something? Like, I learned so much." And she said, "Well, it would be called community organizing, and you actually can have a career in this and learn how to do it." So that's what I did when I left the Peace Corps. But I learned community organizing from Tacho.
Do you remember how you felt when you were sitting in that meeting? That must have been tense, and I don't know if it was confusing or exciting, but how did you feel?
Yeah, I felt really on edge. I mean, it was a little bit of a dangerous situation. My boss had come into town and interviewed Tacho and some others to make sure, I was in a safe situation and wouldn't get roughed up. But I also felt really protected, surrounded by those people, and I could tell they were taking care of me. I had been somewhat of a catalyst for change, but they were taking ownership of it. and they were protecting me, and they felt like, they needed to stand between me and this village chairman. So I actually felt safe, and I felt impressed, by their dedication and courage and investment in this new project. I eventually went to seminary at Princeton, and I was able to study feminist and liberationist theologies and Black theology. And that gave me a language finally to express the faith that I actually had, but I'd never had the words for it. And so as I developed that language and an analysis of the world, that really started to separate me from certain members of my family, particularly my dad and some of my friends. I had to sort of reform community and a little bit family, and my relationship with my dad, with whom I'd been very, very close, was fraught for many years. And with the continued sort of polarization that we see in America, I think, and a lot of that has happened through religion, I've learned how to put those pieces back together and try to stay in a relationship even when we have very, very strong differences. But that took a while to learn how to navigate and how to develop the skills to do that. And for a while, I felt like a person without a home or without a culture. I didn't know where I belonged. It took a long time to reform community.
Yeah.
But I call that coming out of the wilderness, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I had the opportunity to, and I think that is what I was looking for as a young person going into the Peace Corps, is to figure out who I really was, who I really could be outside my culture. And I was, I'm just grateful I had the opportunity to do that, even though it was difficult at times. Anytime you live in another culture, you really have to learn how to actively listen to people, not just hear what they say with words, but to see what their body language is. And so I've been in countless situations where I've been able to sort of read between the words and read the body language, to know sort of how to forge some sort of common agenda across divides. All the skills that Tacho taught me, I've brought into community organizing, basically. I ended up coming back and going to seminary, like I said, and then getting a master's of social work and public policy, focused on public policy and community organizing. So I've blended that theology and organizing into faith-based organizing and activism to bring about greater justice in the world. So I think one of the things I'm most proud of there is helping to pass the Affordable Care Act, organizing, across lines of difference with Catholics, with evangelicals who were pro-life and supporting the legislation because they knew that it would help them reach their goals of life across the spectrum of life. And I was doing that alongside pro-choice people as well, so I was working across these religious lines, working across political difference to bring about passage of that bill. And a lot of what we did was very, very instrumental. I don't think the bill would have passed without the engagement of particularly Catholic Sisters, Catholic Health Association, some of the state level work that we did to bring moderate Democrats to vote for the bill. In my home state of Georgia, I got to make sure that these religious freedom bills that were discriminatory toward LGBTQ people did not pass. And we did that by mobilizing Baptist faith leaders who said, don't discriminate in the name of my faith. And that was a really beautiful moment. And all of that required reaching outside my comfort zone and a lot of people's comfort zone to realize that if you could dialogue with somebody and have a conversation and explain what was going on, and if you could build trust, that you could actually bring about transformation in the world to make sure all people were respected and taken care of. And I think I got the skills to be able to do that while in the Peace Corps. The ability to actively listen, to know that I don't have all the answers, the importance of building trust and building relationship, the amazing power that individuals have on the ground when they decide to invest in something and take action and hold corrupt people accountable. That was the inspiration for everything that I do today.
I'm afraid we're getting to that time. The end of the episode is near, but I want to give Rev Jen a chance to answer a question from my Aunt Deb.
I go to church. Heck, I even give donations. But what does my religion have to do with helping strangers overseas?
As a Christian, I want to live out my Christian values in the world, the love of neighbor, welcoming the stranger, bringing good news to the poor. And I want my country to mirror those kind of values too. And I think that Jewish and Christian and other faith beliefs have really poured their ethical ideas into this country, that we should try to create a peaceful world where all human beings flourish. And the smaller the world gets, the more we understand that we're all interconnected. And actually, Scripture tells us that first. If we look at, the way Jesus operated in the world, he was constantly speaking to foreigners and considering them part of his ministry as opposed to outside of that. And so Jesus also had a really bigger vision of the world. And so I want my country to model those values. I don't want to impose my specific Christian faith on other people, but I think those are values shared by all the world's religious and ethical traditions and moral traditions. And so I've always been most proud of my country when we're living those kinds of values out in the world. And I think it leads to a more safe world overall, which makes our country more safe. It also enables us to forge partnerships and to have trust with people around the world so that we can trade and, open up opportunities together and control diseases. So it's a win-win all around. It's great for the church, to do these things, especially if we can be respectful of other countries and differences and different cultures, which we're learning to do. Sometimes we've done well, sometimes we haven't. But it's also a really wonderful thing for our government to be doing it. All the better, because we have a lot of resources to bring and a lot of know-how.
Huge thanks to Reverend Jen Butler for taking the time to share some stories and, frankly, some hope with us. In a time when so many people feel alienated from each other, Jennifer has made it her life's work to bring people together. Reverend Jen Butler is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary and the College of William and Mary. She has spent the last 3 decades strengthening and rebuilding the progressive faith movement. In 2005, she founded Faith in Public Life, FPL, to amplify progressive faith voices and to forge multiracial, multi-faith, and ideologically diverse faith coalitions. Her book, Born Again, The Christian Right Globalized, remains a go-to resource for those tracking the transnational Christian right. As CEO of FPL, Reverend Jen helped mobilize multi-faith strategies to help pass the Affordable Care Act, to later defeat bogus religious freedom bills in several states, and recently to draw a bright moral line against rising authoritarianism and racism. In 2022, she launched an international network of faith-based democracy defenders. Her most recent book is Who Stole My Bible? Reclaiming Scripture as a Handbook for Resisting Tyranny. To learn more about Jennifer and her work, go to revjenbutler.org. Thanks again for listening. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your feedback. Remember, you can always go to www.softpowerfulstories.org to give us feedback, to check out more on the guests, to see photos of their time from service. It's a good place to go. As always, we appreciate your likes and your shares and your follows and your reviews. All of these things are extremely important to growing a podcast and to helping us find the ears that we would really like to share these stories with. I want to thank my friend Kate Furby for her amazing logo, my friend Kathy Zilski for voicing Dubious Aunt Deb, even though she's nothing like Dubious Aunt Deb, not even a little bit. My name is Christopher Wurst. I'm the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.